And today, as we read our Bible, we realize that in the course of human history, the Lord has used a great variety of people to carry out His purposes in the world. Different people, different circumstance. Allow me to ask each one here right now, how about you? Do you want God to use you for His purposes in His work? Good morning. Indeed, called to be strong and courageous. I love that line in that song that we sang earlier. Who can stand against us if God is for us? It's a truth that we need to learn again and again and again. Who can stand against us if God is for us? Why are we here? Why are we worshiping? Why are we even listening to God's word being preached? It's because we worship a God who is not simply far away, who is not simply the creator, who has not simply created the world and gone far off and not care about the world, but we worship a God who is near, who knows, who is concerned, who is involved in life. That is why we worship. That is why we come and we listen to His word. And today, as we read our Bible, we realize that in the course of human history, the Lord has used a great variety of people to carry out His purposes in the world. Different people, different circumstance. Allow me to ask each one here right now, how about you? Do you want God to use you for His purposes in His work? I hope all of us say, yes, I want Him to use me. As we desire for God to use us, may we learn a lot of lessons from the way God used people in the past. His people, whether in the Bible or even in the contemporary present. But as we desire to learn from these people, allow me to remind each one of us, these people, whether biblical or present day or more modern history, these people, they are all very much humans. Meaning, they have their own weakness, their own limitations. Well, today we are going to look at the life of a man whom God asked to step into some really big shoes. Okay? Big shoes of someone he was supposed to succeed. This someone that he was going to succeed was certainly one of the Lord's most outstanding servant leaders. Okay? So the man that we will be studying today is, of course, Joshua. Let me ask you this then. Who was the spiritual giant that Joshua was to succeed? Who was it? Moses. Moses was such a famous guy that Joshua was certainly intimidated to take over from him. Okay? And of course, Moses was the one God used to lead Israel out of Egypt. But right now, once again, let us bow our heads in prayer. Let's pray for ourselves. Pray for the people around us. And please pray for me as well. Father God, indeed, speak to us once more. Let your word truly penetrate our hearts. May our hearts not be hardened. May our hearts be as receptive soil, good soil, receiving your word, that it may bear fruit 30, 60, 100 times. Speak to us, O Lord. May we be humbled before you. Amen. Called to be strong and courageous. In reality, this message is as much applicable for me as it is for you. It is a message we all need to hear again and again. Our outline today, we will be talking about how God prepared Joshua, then Joshua's elevation or promotion, and God's promises to Joshua, God's instructions to Joshua. We will be looking at Joshua chapter 1. Let's all read together verse 1. May I request everyone to please read? After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Yes, a little background on Joshua. Who is Joshua anyway? What do we know about Joshua from his past? The name Joshua is actually a shortened form of Yehoshua, which means, and let's read, Yahweh is deliverance or salvation. And that is what Joshua means. It's Yahweh is deliverance or Yahweh is salvation. Actually, Yeshua is the Hebrew word for Joshua. Joshua is the English word. The Hebrew word is Yeshua. It is actually equivalent to the Greek word Jesus, whose English equivalent is Jesus. So in fact, Joshua or Yeshua in Hebrew is equal to Jesus or Jesus in Greek. So this name is actually Jesus. It's just in the Old Testament Hebrew. It's much like today when, our MC today, what do we call him? Mark. And of course, he had the Chinese equivalent of Mark would be Maako. Two languages, same name. Such is the word Yeshua or Joshua. That is our character for today. But what about Joshua? Where did he come from? What was his past? Allow me to introduce to you, to review his predecessor. Moses, where was Moses the first 40 years of his life? Egypt. He was born in Egypt. Remember the story? His mother was of great faith. They put him in a basket and he was, put into the river to flow along. Well, first 40 years, Moses was in Egypt, the son of an Egyptian princess. After 40 years, of course, we know something happened. He had to flee. The next 40 years of Moses' life was actually in the wilderness, where he was taking care of goat and sheep. He was a shepherd, 40 years. God used 80 years to prepare Moses for what he was eventually supposed to do, which is to lead Israel out of Egypt. So 40 years, Moses was leading Israel around the wilderness. That's the life of Moses. And yet now today, we look at Joshua. How about Joshua? The first 20 years of Joshua's life was in Egypt. But actually, the Bible does not really talk about this part. It doesn't tell us the circumstances of his birth, of his early years, nothing really. We just believe this because at that time, all the Israelites were actually in Egypt. Well, aside from Moses, who was, of course, in the wilderness by this time, Joshua was probably born in Egypt. First 20 years, he was in Egypt. And then, of course, roughly that time, that was the time when Moses led Israel out of Egypt into the wilderness. And so the next 40 years of Joshua's life, he was in the wilderness working as an assistant of Moses. And then, roughly this is where we're coming in with our study today. But before we talk about that part of Joshua's life, what was the first biblical story about Joshua? Where did Joshua first appear in the Bible? Well, Joshua's first appearance in the Bible was actually in the wilderness. While they were going around, there was a group of people called the Amalekites who attacked the people of Israel in the wilderness. And quickly, Moses asked Joshua, gather the people and go and fight against the Amalekites. And while Joshua fought against the Amalekites, Moses, together with Aaron and Hur, went up the mountain. And Moses had his hands raised while Joshua and the army were fighting the Amalekites. As long as Moses' hands were raised, they were winning. But when he grew tired and his hands came down, the Israelites started to lose. So we remember the story. Aaron and Hur had to hold up Moses' hand, one on each side, until Joshua and the army finally defeated the Amalekites. That's the first appearance of Joshua in the Bible. And then again, when Moses was called up to the mountain by God the second time, the first time was when the Ten Commandments was given. The second time, God called Moses to go up the mountain. Joshua was the one who accompanied Moses to go up the mountain to assist. And when they were coming down, Joshua was the one who said, Sir, I hear the sound of loud sounds, shouting in the camp. What could it be? And then they found out that the people, when they came down, the people were actually singing and dancing. They were worshiping a golden calf. Okay? That was the second time. And during Joshua's preparation time, one of the most famous incident during that period of time in Joshua's life was when Joshua was called together with how many spies in all? How many spies were sent to spy out the land? 12. Okay? Joshua, Caleb, and 10 more. They were sent to spy out the land, to see how the land was, and then to come back to give a report. That was one of the more famous stories in Joshua's life. He was, of course, one of the 12. When they came back, they gave a very good report. Such a beautiful land. And yet, we remember what happened. What did the 10 spies say? They said, it's a beautiful land, but those people are too strong for us. We cannot defeat them. We should not go. But remember, Joshua and Caleb said, yes, the land is beautiful. It's just waiting for us to go and take it. Joshua and Caleb were courageously taking their stand. And yet, because of their stand, because they chose to say what was right, the people became angry with them. Let's read this verse. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. Because they chose to say what was right. Their lives were actually in danger. The people wanted to stone them. Thankfully, God intervened. God showed His glory, and they were spared. Joshua showed his courage. Joshua showed his faith in the Lord, even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of danger, even going against the current of majority opinion. The majority said, no, let's not do it. But Joshua and Caleb said, no, let us do it. And for that, their lives were in danger. Allow me to ask us once again. Has there been a time when you were called to make a decision that was not popular, that was possibly even offensive, and yet that decision was the right decision? Have you been called to make such a decision? Think about it for a while. What was your decision then? Did you choose to please God rather than man? Did you choose the unpopular decision because it was the right decision? The fact is, oftentimes, in big or small, we are called to make such decisions. And it really takes great courage to choose the right one. And I have to confess and say that there have been times when I failed. I chose a decision that was pleasing to man, but could have been displeasing to God. How about us? Towards the end of Moses' life, God spoke again to Moses. And God said, "Behold, the days approach when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting that I may commission him." And so they came. Soon, the inevitable happens. Moses dies. You know what? For 40 years, Joshua had been designated as assistant. That was his title. He was assistant. And he faithfully fulfilled his role. He had been loyal to Moses, and there was no indication whatsoever that in those years that he was Moses' assistant, there was no indication that he tried to usurp Moses' position for himself. Hindi siya nang agaw ng pwesto ni Moses. Hindi niya ginustong agawan ng pwesto si Moses. At least the Bible does not show that. We can say that he was content with his position. Becoming the leader was not something he necessarily aspired for. In fact, at one point in time, there were two men who were actually prophesying, who were probably speaking some words of prophecy. And Joshua, out of his loyalty to Moses, Joshua told Moses, "Sir, tell them to stop. They should not go on prophesying." He was being loyal to Moses. But Moses' reply was this. Moses said, "Are you being jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put His Spirit on them." That was what Moses said. You don't have to defend me. You don't have to be jealous for my sake. Joshua was loyal to Moses. The world calls us to be ambitious. The world calls us to always aspire for higher position, for greater fame, for greater riches. When someone is not ambitious, the world calls that someone weak. Joshua was not like that. He was a good leader, but as Moses' assistant, he knew his place. He knew his place. He knew he was there to assist Moses. He was not there to supersede Moses. Remember the story of Lucifer? What happened to him? He was God's chief angel, and yet he became too ambitious. He wanted to be equal to God, and that became his downfall. Thankfully, Joshua was not like that. You see, what was important was not promotion. What was important was faithfulness. Fulfilling your assignment faithfully. And that was Joshua. 40 years, assistant pa rin. After 40 years, Moses passed away. And so God tells Joshua, Moses is dead, it's your turn. It's time for Joshua's promotion. What Joshua was being prepared for 40 years is now a reality. 40 years he was under training. Now he becomes the leader, the man who will lead Israel. In God's perfect wisdom and timing, Joshua was ready. He was not perfect, but he was ready. He's now the leader of this people. At this point in time, the Israelites, if you look at the map of Israel, actually the map of Israel, roughly at the middle, there's a river coming down the middle of Israel. That's the Jordan River. Then there's the eastern portion of Israel, the western portion. At this point that God was speaking to Joshua, they were at the eastern portion of Israel. This was the entire thing was the promised land. They had already conquered the eastern portion. Now they were getting ready to cross the Jordan River to conquer the main part of the promised land. There's still much land to be taken, and Joshua was the man to lead Israel to do that task. So God says, "Now therefore, arise, go over Jordan, you and all these people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel." You see, this was God's command. Go, lead them. But God does not stop there. God does not simply say, okay, you have to lead them. God does not simply say that. God actually gave Joshua a lot of promises to encourage him as he undertook this huge assignment. God gave him a lot of promises. Let's read together verses 2 through 5. Okay? To see God's promises to Joshua. What were these promises? Okay? As we read through them, in your mind, start picking out what were the promises presented here. Okay? So what we're looking for are God's promises. Let's read. Moses, my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all these people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Do you see a promise there? Yeah, okay. So again, later on we'll go through those quickly lang. Okay. Then let's read. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. And then the latter part of verse 9, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Did you see a lot of promises in that passage? Practically, verse after verse after verse of God's promises to Joshua. God says, you're going to lead these people. And then he goes on, okay, here are my promises to you. This and this and this. What were the promises? God says, in that land I am giving to you. God says, every place that you step on will be yours. God says, from here to here, from here to here, that will be your land. And then God says, no one will be able to stand up against you. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Why did God have to give so many promises? The fact is, what Joshua and the Israelites were facing were really formidable, scary. That was what Joshua and the people were facing. That's why God had to reassure them. God had to say, listen, I promise. I promise. And these are my promises to you. Joshua was facing difficulty, and God graciously gave him these promises as his assurance. You know, our God is a promise-giving God. Some people, in studying the Bible, say that there are more than 7,000 promises made by God to the people in the Bible. More than 7,000. How many of God's promises do we know? Well, of course, not all of those 7,000 promises were made to us. Not everything can be claimed by us. But do we believe God's promises? Do we believe those promises that were made to us? I don't know exactly what's happening in your life. I don't know what you are facing. But I encourage you to study God's promises, to meditate on them, to hold on to them, to claim them, to believe in them. Here are some biblical promises that we actually can claim. Okay? There are a lot more in the Bible. These are simply a few examples that we need to go, we need to study them, we need to claim them, because God gave us these promises. Hold on to God's faithfulness. And yet, Joshua, he was very much human. Even with all these promises that God gave him, Joshua was weak. Doubtless, he had his fears, and he needed to be reminded and encouraged. And thus, God challenged Joshua. What did God tell Joshua? God says, yes, here are my promises. This is what you need to do. And let's read together. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God gave Joshua promises, and yet God said, but this is what you need to do. They had a big task ahead of them. It was difficult, but God told Joshua, be strong and courageous. God said, you shall cause these people to inherit the land. Be strong and very courageous. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be discouraged. You know, in this chapter, Joshua chapter 1 alone, 4 times. Well, in these verses, 3 times, there's a 4th time that Joshua was told, be strong and courageous. 4 times. Why? It must be because Joshua was afraid. It must be because Joshua, even though he had 40 years of training, even though he had God's promises, even then, he was fearful. That's why God had to encourage him again and again and again. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. But you know what? God did not just tell Joshua, be strong and courageous. Basta, maglakas loob ka lang. God does not just say that. God says, and let's look. God says, be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left. Do not let this book depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. Be careful to do everything written in it. Yes, Joshua had a big task. The big task was to go into the promised land to attack. That was so important. And yet, God does not just give Joshua some strategies, some blueprint of how to attack. God does not do that. God tells Joshua, seek me. Seek me. Seeking God was Joshua's key to being prosperous and successful. It's really not about being courageous and having good leadership skills. Yes, Joshua had to plan, he had to strategize, but ultimately, it all starts with the foundation of seeking and spending time with the commander-in-chief. To go back to the operations manual of God's Word, seeking God was really foundational in what Joshua was being asked to do. God was saying, yes, Joshua, you have a big task ahead of you. You will be leading the people into the promised land. But first, seek me. Study my word. Know it. Obey it. Let it be your guide. And of course, in our lives, we are called to do the same. We have been given our respective assignments in life. But we have to be careful not to be so focused only on what to do and then forget about our relationship with the chief shepherd. We need to come to the chief shepherd to develop a relationship with him, to build a relationship with him, to grow intimate with him, and then to serve him. Sometimes we can be so focused on what we need to do. We can be so focused on doing this and doing that, on ministering in church, on being part of this ministry, on whatever. We can be so focused on those, we neglect our relationship with God. Let's face it. When I preach, people see me. When I lead songs here, people see me. When I organize this and that activity, people see me. But when I have my quiet time, when I have my prayer time, my Bible reading time, people don't see that. Let's face it, sometimes it feels good having people say, okay siya, working hard for the Lord. Yung quiet time, bahala na. Wala naman nakakakita. But God sees. God wants us to come to Him, to spend time with Him. God says to Joshua, be careful to obey. Don't let this book depart from your mouth. Meditate, study, apply. How about us? How about me? How much time do I spend in reading God's Word, in communicating with Him? Far from enough. How about you? Have you been spending time with our Lord? Well, Joshua, in the rest of the chapter 1, Joshua obeyed. Then he went, he gave instructions to the people. And of course, the rest of the book of Joshua, he leads the people in this campaign and takes the land. Joshua. 40 years, 60 years of training, still scared. God says, don't be afraid. God says, I am with you. God says, this land will be yours. No one can stand against you. God says, be strong and courageous. Study my word and apply it in your life. And that is God's message to each and every one of us through the life of Joshua. A faithful man of God, weak in himself, but he chose to put his trust in the God whose promise can be counted on. Let's bow our heads. Let us pray. Father God, thank you for Joshua. Thank you for the life of Joshua. Thank you that he is like us, weak, prone to fear, and yet you used him mightily. You made him a mighty man of courage. May we be mighty men and women for you, faithfully obeying you and carrying out your task for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.